intro first. We have with us today Mark and Johanna. Mark is an agile coach who has cultivated more distributed and dispersed teams than co-located ones. His easygoing style helps teams learn to collaborate and discover their path to success and sustainability. You can find more about Mark at markkilby.com for his blogs and archives. And for those of you listening to this on the podcast, the links are in the show notes as usual. And we also have Johanna Rothman, who helps leaders and teams see problems and resolve risks and manage their product development. Johanna is also the author of, I don't know how many books now. I have 14 here. I don't know if it's still true.
It's more now. Yeah.
Johanna has been writing books. I guess, what, 2-3 a year since you started?
No, no. I wrote one, and then it was a couple years, and I wrote another every couple years, and then in 2012, when I started to self-publish, that's when I figured out how to write more frequently and publish more often. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
we're
think she's
all-
getting. Yeah, I think she's getting exponentially faster with her writing.
Yes, she is spreading her creativity a lot more, that's for sure. So you can find more about Johanna at Pragmatic Manager, a monthly email newsletter, and her blog at jrothman.com and createadaptablelife.com. And for those of you listening on the podcast, the links will be on the show notes. So Johanna, Mark, we're here to talk about how to rapidly go remote and thrive, not just survive. So let's start first by opening up that heading for this session, that title for this session. Mark, would you get us started? What do you guys mean when you talk about going rapidly remote to thrive and not just survive?
So the big difference, and we were talking about this a little bit beforehand as we were kind of in the warm-up phase of the podcast. When Johanna and I started, most of the individuals were working out of or from choice. Some were not. Some were, as I like to say, voluntold that they'll be remote. But some from choice, especially the last, I would say, 6 or 7 years with the remote first companies that have been popping up. It's been attractive to certain individuals. I certainly enjoy remote first organizations, but now we have hundreds of thousands of people that have now been literally kicked out of their offices, and they may or may not have the infrastructure in place, and they may or may not have working agreements around all these tools or lack of tools that they have. So the first thing that I see is important is, how do you keep connected as a team while you're online? That's probably the first thing to do to thrive, and to set a regular cadence around that connection. So yes, you might have daily stand-ups, but provide some flexibility so people will have time to share what's happening in their life and can connect with others, because this is a very isolating experience for many people who were not prepared.
Perhaps
Johanna probably
alienating, right? People feel like
Yes.
they are out of touch.
Yeah. So
Well,
Johanna, I'm sure.
Yeah. I always have something to say. They are out of touch. Literally, right? We're supposed to practice the social distancing. I think it's really important for people to say, how can I work at all? That's the first thing, because we all have pressures on us that pull us in many, many directions. If you have children, your children are going to pull you in directions. Even if you have grown children, you want to check in with them, as I do. If you have older parents, you want to check in with them, as I do. So I think it's really important to say, what are our hours of overlap, right? So Mark and I in the book talk about hours of overlap. And even if we're all in the same literal time zone, even if we're all in the same city, we are not able to work together all the time. We have we have things pulling us apart. So can we carve out an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, maybe an hour in the evening? I mean, how can we make at least 2 or 3 hours to work together? And if we can do that, we might actually find that remote work allows us to thrive in ways office work did not. I have a blog post coming on busy work. I am really hoping that the busy work goes away.
So when you talk about hours of overlap, I think you mean something more specific than just be at the laptop at a certain time, right? Though.
Oh, I definitely mean collaborate with other people on your team.
So like be on a call or actively chat together or have the daily check-in at that time or something like that, right?
And
Right.
even swarm or mob or pair.
Yeah. It's especially in this time where some of us might have young children at home, or you might be dealing with family members who are ill in the home, and you keeping quote normal office hours unquote is impossible. So having a conversation as soon as you can with your team members around when can I be available at a normal time, and what are the things that we truly need to collaborate on. So do we need to plan together? Do we need to pair or mob together to co-develop something? Uh, do we need to review the work and retrospect the work together? And how will that work with this new schedule? But if you try to keep a normal time during a situation like this, it will cause irritation. So so the other advice I would say is patience, patience, patience with your coworkers.
Especially now because a lot of us will be working at home with my children, with our children. And as I
Yeah.
as I say this, I can hear my children in the background. They're playing some computer game after having done their schoolwork, which they do
Hmm.
every day because
Yeah.
schools are remote now. Even schools are remote now.
Yeah.
Jesus, we're in this session, and I didn't even realize. Even schools are remote now, right? And that also has an impact, right? It's like it's not just the distractions of maybe you see, stuff at home is not as you want, and you're tempted to go and fix it, or you have
Oh,
laundry to do, or whatever. It's also kids around, maybe the pets,
Hmm.
and so on. We need to get used to something that many of us who worked at an office never had to get used to.
Right. And another part of that is getting used to some maybe different ways to use some of the tools. So you might have a meeting tool like we have here right now for the recording, like Zoom. Uh, but if you have also a separate chat tool, Slack, Microsoft Teams, something like that, you can have a dedicated team channel, and that's what we refer to as a back channel, which is probably your best way right now to stay in touch with team members. It can be used synchronously or asynchronously. So when you're in those hours of overlap and somebody says, hey, can I get somebody to maybe look over my design or look over this document or work that I'm producing right now, they might have that availability. You may not get the whole team, but you might get part of the team to work because you're in those hours of overlap. However, when you're going into a meeting and let's say your kid who is now doing schoolwork at home and struggling and asking you for help repeatedly, you might say, oh, you might get on your phone and say, I can't handle this right now. My kid needs me. Can we push back 30 minutes, 60 minutes? Again, be flexible, be patient. Uh, that's going to happen a lot in the next few weeks. So try to keep that flexibility.
Yeah,
I think it's
absolutely.
really important to have empathy with people. So, I mean, I have had the experience of attempting to work from home with small sick children. I have not had the experience of working from home with healthy children who needed to do their homework, which is a different experience. And
Yes.
I got to say, I'm kind of happy I'm past that stage.
You skipped
So
that.
I did, and I'm kind of happy about it. So I think I I can imagine what it's like, and I can put myself in somebody's shoes, and I can say to them, um, I see you have, or I recognize you have a lot of pressures and pulls on your time. You tell me, when can you make either a 15-minute or a 30-minute or a 45-minute or a 1 hour time box? Maybe you can only give me 20 minutes every hour or two, in which case we will make the work smaller so
Hmm.
that we can work on it together, right? So, um, Vasco, I know that you're a fan of making the work smaller.
Hmm.
And the more we make the work smaller, where we have an outcome, not a task, not an output, and the more we can work together, the more thriving we can do, the more successful we will be.
Yeah, and actually, that's one of the things that perhaps an advantage for teams that have embraced Agile and been doing Agile for a long time is that uh, if you're going to go remote, the good thing is that Agile teams work much better remote than non-Agile teams because they don't
Oh, yeah.
need the same type of interaction. We have very short time boxes, typically a week or 2 weeks. After each
Yeah.
time box, we review where we are. We have our daily check-ins. The culture of work for Agile teams is already more adequate, although perhaps not perfect for distributed teams, right?
Oh, yeah. And I think that part of it is, how do we make it so we can actually understand how to make the work small enough so we can all work on it as a team as we can. I also think that managing our WIP limits, our work in progress limits, is really helpful at this time. If everybody takes their own story, yeah, that's not going to work. But if we somehow collaborate on stories, that we can make a lot more progress.
Right. So in that case, because we're collaborating on these small pieces of work, the counter to that is when several of us used to do more waterfall type approaches or traditional approaches, you could go with a set of assumptions and go off for weeks and maybe find out you did something completely wrong because of you had a misunderstood assumption. Never happened to any of us, I'm sure. So.
Oh God, yeah, all the time.
I
Yeah.
used to be a project manager. I told people to do that. This
So
was
I
before
I
my
only
agile
learned
reality.
yeah, I only learned I am an old programmer. So we only had 1 to 3 month projects back when I was a software developer, and in the early days. And I actually learned very early on, if I did not show somebody my assumptions, they were all wrong. So I got used to doing monthly reviews or demos. And this is back in the 70s and 80s. So the idea of doing monthly demos or reviews to show people our work, we can do that now with even smaller stuff, which I think is, especially if you're remote, and you're new to remote work, the more often you can show other people your work, the more often you can um, show the product owner or the managers or the sponsors what you're thinking, the more the the better your outcomes will be.
So one of the things that so Bobby put a question on the Slack channel. I'll read that out loud in a second. We also did a survey preparing for this live event, and I have a few questions related to that. So Bobby's question was, we're getting a lot of pressure not to tax the company's network, and I guess he means the communications network, so bandwidth. For an agile team that is already used to working remotely, separate from the current circumstances, how do we continue to function as a team with even less ability to collaborate on a business as usual manner? We have very strict policies, he says, on the tools we can use, and most of them require you to be on the corporate network.
Can I take this, please, Mark?
Go for it.
So you can say to your managers, that's fine. We will slow down. We will do only one thing a day maximum. We are happy not to tax the corporate network. We will take care of our families. We will do our laundry. We will do all kinds of other stuff. And when you want us to work, we will be happy to work. But you cannot take away our tools and expect the same results. Okay, you should probably want to say that a little bit more politically and not with your voice raised as much. But this is a stupid, Bobby, you are not stupid. Your managers are not thinking. That was a couple of expletives deleted and a couple of edits on what the managers were.
Yes.
I mean,
yes, and
yeah. You cannot do business as usual if you have to be on the corporate network and they don't want you to tax the corporate network. If they don't have enough bandwidth, they should fix that problem.
Yeah, that should be the top priority. And I was going to emphasize the biggest thing is there's nothing business as usual these days. Everything is disrupted. I mean, we talked a little bit before the podcast started about some of the bandwidth issues on popular tools. So there was an issue with Microsoft Teams a few days ago. Zoom has been having some issues.
Week, it went down.
Yeah. There's been problems with Zoom breakout rooms where people have kind of ghosted in and out of different breakout rooms. That's been happening off and on. So everybody's infrastructure is being stressed right now. So anybody who says business as usual has not paid attention. However, if your team feels like, well, we still want to make some progress, you might talk to your operations staff, if you can, say, okay, when is the network not busy? When are you seeing any patterns to when it's not busy? Because maybe we can shift our schedule a little bit. But that's also with the expectation that there is no 9 to 5 for this team. So if the team is going to adjust its hours to be more effective in this scenario, they should not be expected to go to other meetings during business as usual. There has to be some kind of compromise if the organization wants some progress. I can't even use the word productivity. There's very little of that these days right now. Everyone's trying to adapt to this.
Yeah, so I wanted to go back a little bit to the heading of the session we have today. I have some phrases from the survey here. So the overall type of answer that I got that was the most common is that we are basically just not ready to go remote. Here's one phrase, quote, I converted my local team in a remote team into a remote team in a few days. They weren't prepared for this huge change. Another listener says, when we talk about team performance, the Tuckman and Edison model, I had a functional team performing, and now I have a dysfunctional team trying to figure out how they can be productive working from home. Now, you guys suggested the title, Going Rapidly Remote to Thrive and Not Just Survive. So let's give our audience, some tips, some steps maybe on how to go from having a working team co-located working team to, of course, after a short transition, to having a functional, productive remote team.
So I think the first thing is to really address the working agreements, right? We are not within 30 meters of each other at work, or 6 meters or 12 meters, whatever it was, that we wrote it down in the book, so I don't have to remember it. But we are very far apart. We have varying access to tools, even cameras and headsets, right? The three of us have external cameras and external headsets, and most people I know don't even have that. So I think that's really a problem. That means that you feel quite exposed. And if we can actually kind of lean into that vulnerability and lean into that exposure and see each other as humans, we can create better working agreements that we might use as experiments, that we have a working agreement for a day or two and then reflect on it.
Yeah, and I was going to say it's experimenting around the tools, it's experimenting around how we use the tools, but it's also experimenting with your environment. So I think the three of us probably have our own separate space or office space. I know many people right now that don't have that. And so you need to think about where's the best place that you can focus. Uh, Usually a place like a kitchen, not a great choice because that's where most of your family is going to go through during the day. So is there a corner of a room or some other place where you can also get some natural light? Because if you don't have that natural light, you're going to get even more stir crazy if you're not accustomed to working this way. But also coming up with working agreements with your family is important. So signaling when you need that focus time and when they need your time, and how can you signal that to each other. So I can only share this for the ones that are on the Zoom right now, but I'll verbalize it. So Johanna has seen my red warning light for the office door. So that red warning light is on the inside and outside of my office, and my family knows that when that light is on, and if they come in, they automatically get introduced to everybody in the online meeting. So that's why I refer to when you work remote, every day is bring your kids to work day. So
yeah, absolutely. That's a great phrase. So we get together, we talk a little bit about working agreements. Perhaps do that 1 day working agreement, the experiment you were just referring to. What's next? Once we get the working agreement done, what should we be looking at as potential next steps?
So here's,
can I,
go ahead,
so let me
Mark.
jump in on this one. So whenever I start with a new team, I try to look not only for the times to collaborate, but for the times for the group to socially connect. They have to connect with each other before they connect with the work. Otherwise, there's very little chance of collaboration. So, and some of this can be very simple. When you have a stand-up or another meeting, you might say, hey, I'm going to be on just a few minutes early. If anybody just wants to catch up on how you are, how things are going. Some people need that connection time, whether you're introvert or extrovert, it doesn't matter. It helps to provide that opportunity for people to connect. When Johanna and I were working on the book, our first few minutes were always kind of connecting on how are you, where are you at today? Are you filling up to a full session of work, or do we need to back it off? And so checking in on that, especially in this situation, is key. Johanna, did you have something else?
Yeah, aside from the check-in, I was going to mention that I think that this is the time when we can say, what's the one thing we need to do as a team today? What
Yeah.
is the one thing we can accomplish? Um, I cannot remember the name of it. Teresa Amabile, and I think somebody else wrote this great book about how people feel about finishing work. Um, Vasco, I will send you the name of the book later because of course I don't remember it. And it turns out that we can get lots of things to 90% and 95% done, and we feel like we have not finished anything. And part of the way we are able to sustain ourselves is we finish one thing at a time. We take it off our board, we cross it off our list, we do whatever it is that makes us feel good. I have a board and a list. So, because I have a today list and I have a board for the week. So I love moving that sticky. I love crossing off today. I actually get really jazzed by finishing something. I don't think I'm alone. And I think that if a team together learns how to finish something every day, that is a way for them to thrive. They will, I'm sure that people, especially the people who are new to remote work, they're not going to finish what they used to finish. So forget what you used to do. Say, what are we going to do today? And finish that.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. Well, one of the things I talk a lot about with my teams is this idea that uh, when we have a sprint, the goal is not to finish all the stories in that sprint. The goal is to do something that has an impact. This is the second time we talk about outcomes over outputs, right? But
Mhm.
the idea is that once you know what the goal is, you can actually effectively collaborate. Then you can flex what you're working on in order to be able to reach that goal. So you end up not needing to finish all the stories, but still delivering value so that the stakeholders are happy, so that the product owner and maybe other teams, if you serve other teams, are happy. So that's kind of perhaps a perspective that is even more important when working remote, because as you guys said just a few moments ago, we will literally be more distant. We won't see
Mhm.
each other all the day,
Yeah.
which means that there's a lot less chance for impromptu coordination events. It's more things that need to be planned. So if we have clear goals, we can then collaborate more effectively, because if I need to do something to achieve that goal and I can call Johanna or Mark and say, hey, I need help with this. Can you guys help me?
Mhm. Or if you use that idea of the back channel, like we have here with Slack, it's keeping in touch with the rest of the team that way as well. Say, hey, I've got some time, or I've got an idea, or I know some of you are struggling with this new tool we're using. I can do a quick tutorial if some of you like, and I coordinate that through the back channel. So I've actually been trying to answer some of the questions that have been popping up here, but only providing one example because I know we want to talk about it here on the podcast. But using that, getting accustomed to using that back channel is a key skill to help you and your team thrive when you're working online like this.
Yeah, maybe that's one question for you guys that are on the Slack channel. Could you then answer, do you have a back channel in your team right now? Can you guys go there and say, yes, I do, and then say what tool? Or if you don't, then just go there and say, no, we don't. As we get to a little bit more on these tips, there's a question by Niels. I know that Mark has already posted some content there on the Slack for Niels, but the question is, what are important indicators to get a feel for how the team is doing when working remotely? How can I feel how the team is doing without constantly being on their back, which I'm pretty sure is something that many Scrum Masters are asking themselves right now. And I'm used to looking at the facial expressions and behavior of my colleagues on the floor, but now that's obviously not available. Do you have tips on how to replace that?
So, Mark, do you want to say what you answered? Because I
Sure.
also have some ideas.
Yeah. So one idea is I actually posted right in the Slack channel. You might do a simple informal question, and you might do this once a week. If you feel like the tension's a little higher, you might do it a little more often. But I basically asked the question, how are you feeling today? And ask them to please answer in a thread. One, are you worried? Two, are you distracted? Three, are you able to make some progress? Four, you're doing well. Or five, there's something else, and you can either share a comment here in the Teams channel, or another option is, can you direct message me as Scrum Master, Coach, whatever, and let's see if we spend some time talking about it. So that's a less invasive way, and people can choose to respond or not. There are certainly tools and plugins you can do for Slack, but sometimes I find just a casual question like that in the team's back channel can help you get a sense of how the team is doing. Johanna?
So, this is where the cameras on as a default is so important. Um, Niels is asking, what do I do instead of manage by walking around and listening? And whether it's literally manage or facilitate or serve, right? Whatever that focus is. But I think it's really important to say, um, do you need one-on-ones? And how often should they be? And what is the duration of them? So I don't know that I would recommend every Scrum Master, manager, facilitator, coach have a one-on-one with everybody every week. That seems, especially if your team has a Scrum Master, a coach, and a manager. I would definitely not advocate that. But I think it's important to say, maybe even ask the team, can you tell me and possibly make it a private DM to me? How do you feel that you're doing? Do you, what kind of impediments do you have? What kind of problems are you trying to solve around the work or in the work? And if you give people examples and say, my job is to serve you, and I don't want to impose, and I don't want to let you run open loop. I don't know how to best do that. Please help me. Now, notice I said two things. I don't know, and please help me. When you say, I don't know, and you ask for help, you make it possible for other people to say, I don't know either, and I need help.
That's actually a very good point, and something that we talk about on the podcast a lot, which is modeling the behavior, right? If you want people to ask for help when they need help, then you should ask for help when you need help.
Yep.
So we talked about addressing working agreements, checking in so that we connect socially with our colleagues. We talked about focusing on goals, not tasks. And now we talked about the back channel, having that back channel. What else do we need to make sure we have in place to get started quickly with a productive remote team?
So you missed one thing because Mark didn't name it. It was called time shifting.
Okay.
So that your entire team might need to time shift to accommodate everybody's schedules. Um, I didn't want to lose that. I think that if we, I think that part of it is, how can you default to collaborative work? We are our our managers who were not remote as technical people and might not have ever been technical people might not realize that all of our work is actually, it needs to be collaborative so that we can learn as we go. And how can you default to collaborative work when everybody's working at home and might have different schedules? I don't know the answer to this. I do know that this is a question I would ask the team.
Yeah, maybe
And
even within the working agreement session, no?
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, because I still find that a lot of developers tend to work alone. A lot of testers tend to work alone, and even if we just I realize that this might be a strange idea to many of you. I have found a lot of value in developer tester pairs. And especially if we think about test driven development, not as test driven development, but as design driven development, right? Behavior driven development, and we use acceptance test driven development, then we are actually thinking about the problem from a different perspective. So while I hesitate to say consider different technical practices, I find that when we consider different technical practices for non co-located team, especially for newly remote teams, we might see how to work differently that actually work better for us.
another element to defaulting to collaboration is once the team settles into a working pace with this new remote way of working, you might also want to think about how can the team be resilient with this. We're in some challenging times. You might have infrastructure that fails for certain people. You might have people that get sick. And how can the team be resilient in this case? How can they look out for each other? How can they collaborate so that somebody else could pick up the work and somebody doesn't feel like they have to work while sick? That's more important now than ever. When Johanna and I were collaborating, we worked around bad Wi-Fi connections. We worked around hurricanes because I'm in Florida where hurricanes happen. Uh, and so we would talk about the resilience of our team and how we would want to respond to keep moving forward. Because for some people, the work will be a relief. I know with me, if there's a lot going on, if I can just focus on some work for a while, it helps me calm down in a way. So, and for some people that works, for some it does not. So it's probably worth having a conversation around how can we be resilient in some of these different scenarios we might face.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that came up as one of the most common topics, challenges that Scrum Masters face when they are working with remote teams, we of course have already slightly touched on the topic, but it is, how do we make sure that remote team members are coordinating and collaborating? Let me just put a few phrases from our survey here. So one Scrum Master wrote, "I'm spending much more effort to synchronize the work and solve the lack of communication." Another one writes, "Now that we're distributed, we miss out on all the spontaneous collaboration that used to happen." And a third one still writes, "Maintaining visibility, transparency, and goal is the challenge." How have you guys been able to tackle this? Because I mean, we've touched upon this already slightly, but the coordination and collaboration now needs to, it needs to adapt to this new reality, and we need to start to realize that the tools that used to work at the office, like for example a shared Kanban board, might not be working anymore now. So how do you guys handle that, and what has worked for you guys in the past?
So if your team used a physical board, can, before you go searching for a tool, can you just replicate that? Can somebody replicate that in their space and put a camera on it? Not optimal for long term, but at least for the short term, if you can replicate the board, and that will give the team time to figure out, okay, do we move this into a tool? Is this good enough? And whoever's the keeper of the board will probably have to coordinate that. That might be a Scrum Master, that might be a coach. It might be somebody on the team. I've seen team members do that. I've also seen teams that have had physical boards and they've had an electronic tool, and they may not always pay attention to the electronic tool. So now might be the time to pay attention to the electronic tool and use that as your primary communication. But again, it's having that time to explore, what do we need out of the tool? What does the tool provide us? And what are some new working agreements around that? Johanna?
Can I add something about the board? It is entirely possible you need a different board right now.
Yes, yes.
And that Mark and I have advocated something like Google Sheets as a way to experiment with the board, because you can change the columns anytime you want, and you don't need admin permission. So
Right.
before you go get a tool, before you sign up for an electronic board, especially in this time of upheaval, let's experiment with the board and do something that's inexpensive and easy to change. Sorry, Mark, I really wanted to get that in.
No, that's a great point, because I've had teams that have shifted or changed dramatically, and we've even have this in the book where we talk about these teams will work in the spreadsheet for a while. They can, some of my teams have adjusted their columns almost daily as they're trying to get that sense of the work and how the work should flow in this new environment. They weren't facing the current conditions, but they were facing a lot of change at the time. but having that power for them to adjust the board as they needed it helped them really understand how the work was changing at the time. And so keep it as simple as possible, but make that work visible.
I wanted to add a couple more things because, of course, I have a big mouth. Um, I I think that if we one thing I have seen about that helps collaboration and coordination and um, all those good C words is to actually demo to the team every single day. I'm not talking about demoing to a product owner if you don't want to, but if the Scrum Master says, "Can we all agree that we will demo at 4:15 local time, right, every single day, whatever we have done?" And that gives us a focus on doing something that's useful, this outcome thing over output, and having people focus on fewer things but working together and getting to done all that good stuff that we really want in our teams. So I think that we need to approach this collaboration business a little bit obliquely, not say to people, "I want you to collaborate." No, but if you say, can we agree as a working agreement that every day at noon or every day at whatever time, right? Whatever time actually works for you, that the demo might be even more important than the stand up, that the demo might lead to the questions that the stand up should generate. So, um, I'm not I'm not saying change everything. I guess I'm saying change everything. Yeah.
Adapt, right?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, adapt.
yeah, this
Yeah.
business of adapting is so important. I mean, we have different circumstances. We need to generate options for working differently. Vasco, I have a post on my Create Adaptable Life blog. I will also give you that link.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I wanted to modify one thing you said, Johanna, is pick a time that works for the team.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, not for somebody
Yes.
outside the team. Yeah.
No, 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 no.
So, guys, we're getting close to the end of this session. So please put your questions on the remote live QA uh, Slack channel if you have questions. I do have one question that Joanna asked me to make sure I ask, which is the human factor when working with remote teams. So Joanna, explain that further and tell us why it's so important and how we as Scrum Masters, Agile coaches can keep that in mind at all times.
So, even Bobby's question about the network was a prime example of this. That we are, and Bobby also said later on in the Slack that they use Teams with Skype as a backup. So I'm I might have opinions about both of those tools. I will um, refrain from offering you those opinions. You might you might actually say, how can we check in on each other as humans? How can we understand our human context? How can we understand how to help each other? I wish I could tell you I was a touchy-feely person. No, I am a hard-boiled egg. When Mark and I were writing the book, Mark would actually say things like, um, "Do you think we could change the wording there?"
Might have said it
And
once or twice. Yeah.
yeah, more often. So I don't come at this from being a people person. I actually come at this from saying if we want work to succeed, we have to acknowledge that people are doing the work. What do we need to support the people, not just the team that produces features and products, but how do we help the people um, understand how to work and what to work on and how to collaborate.
Absolutely. And it's in the end, at the end of the day, it is all about that aspect, about how people collaborate, how people interact. And you guys mentioned quite at the start of this session that we need to be very patient when
Mhm.
going towards remote work. And also we need to be very tolerant, right? Always assume the best, right? The prime directive is very much needed when we talk about teams that have just recently moved to remote.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really, especially if you don't have your cameras on, if you only use the chat back channel, right? If you cannot see each other and you don't see the small children running in and out of the room, and you don't see the person trying to make dinner because the only place you have to work is at the kitchen table. If you don't see that other people's context, you
Mhm.
cannot possibly have empathy for them. So one thing Mark and I have advocated from the start is turn your camera on. Leave it on. Let people see your context. I wrote in a recent blog post that if I don't have the right lighting in my office, I kind of look like a serial killer with many chins. And uh, it does not matter that I look like a serial killer with many chins. And this is why light is so important. It's more important that people see my context.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
would I, I I can't emphasize that enough. I never force anyone to turn a camera on, but your your team can help you so much more when they see what you're dealing with behind and around you. If it Sometimes it's calm, other times it's not. Um, I have a picture that I'll send for the podcast when I was first speaking about remote teams, and it is a stage picture, but my children helped me represent a worst case scenario of remote working. So I'll send that to you, Vasco.
Please do. I'll definitely put it. Okay, last question from me, then will close off, which is how to keep team members engaged, but especially now, because I mean, it's not just about remote, right? It is about remote in these specific circumstances. So how do we keep team members engaged in the daily meeting, in the sprint planning, in the refinement meetings, whatever sessions, ceremonies, demos, retrospectives? How do we keep teams engaged while having remote meetings and right now in this situation?
So I'll emphasize what Johanna said before, default to collaboration. So it's not just good facilitation, it's are you including the team in the meeting, or are you instead broadcasting out to the team? That's going to disengage team members, especially when they have concerns, they have worries, they have other things that are pulling them away right now. Uh, so it's getting them, it's recognizing the situation and the humanity of the situation as well. That's why I said earlier, getting on a little bit before the meeting starts just to connect with people and to get them to share some of those concerns ahead of time is the simplest tool you can use out of your tool bag. But it helps calm some people and say, okay, I can focus now. I've at least said something about it. I feel better. Let's talk about it. Keep in mind, you might want to stay on with one or two of those team members after the meeting if they seem very stressed, and offer that as well. That way, that allows them to focus and stay connected in the meeting when the meeting's happening, but give that extra time to them.
And Vasco, you and I actually talked about this before, I think before Mark got on. One thing, Vasco asked me, how are things here in the US? I'm in Boston, and everywhere in the US is different. And I actually said, I don't think I know. And I only watch the news in the morning with my breakfast, and then again at night with dinner. And that's it. I don't
Mhm.
I don't watch the news. I don't have breaking news on my phone. I don't
Yeah.
watch cable news. I do want to say I want to know if the governor wants us to shelter in place. I will do that. Right now, we are still able to go to the grocery store. We can take walks around the neighborhood. We can do stuff like that. But we are supposed to stay home. And if there's you know, bad news always finds us. We don't have
Mhm.
to go out looking for it. So if you are ratcheted up from the news, you might consider doing what I do, which is just limit your news watching. And
Diet
if
the news.
yeah, diet the news. I like that. And if the people you serve are also ratcheted up, then you might offer that as an alternative to what they're doing. So I don't have any. I have no news apps on my phone, zero. And because if it's really a problem, I will find out, right? People will tell
Yeah.
me there will be something, there will be an emergency I will learn about it, but I don't need to keep up with all that, that nonsense. And often, um, I will say this, and it's probably not popular. I have noticed that every news outlet has their own perspective. So I find it a challenge to actually find the real truth in everything. So I'm not looking for it. I'm just not.
Yeah, sometimes work is a good escape from the messiness of reality.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And help your colleagues also with that. Bring them back to work because it can be a stress reliever for some, at least.
Yeah.
Guys, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for spending this hour with us, Johanna and Mark. And let's start with you, Johanna. If people want to know a little bit more about you, where to find you, and where to follow the work that you're doing, where can they go?
So start at jrothman.com, JROTHMAN.com. I'm Johanna Rothman on Twitter and LinkedIn. And yeah, I would love to connect with people and see what's going on for them.
Perfect. Thank you, Johanna. How about you, Mark? Where can people can go to connect with you?
So my website, markkilby.com, have a newsletter there. It was monthly. It's suddenly gone weekly as I'm sharing other
For some
resources.
reason.
For some reason, just to share some resources for people who've gone suddenly remote. You can also find information on a free rapidly remote course through my website as well as Johanna's. That's a self-paced course that'll hopefully help some teams that might be listening to this. Twitter, LinkedIn, I'm also on there as M Kilby, and happy to answer questions.
Absolutely. And for all of you guys on the live session, Mark and Johanna are on Slack. If you still have questions after this, of course, don't hesitate to go there and ask some questions. Mark and Johanna, thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
And Vasco, thank you so much, especially for letting me rant and rave.
Thanks, Vasco. I really appreciate it.